Lucas Grayson had been in the thick of battle before. He had seen the chaos of interstellar war, the bodies strewn across ruins, the smell of scorched metal and burned ozone from plasma blasts. But nothing had prepared him for what he found that night. The city of Zolara lay in ruins, a battlefield caught in the crossfire between the warring factions of the Galactic Union and the rogue forces of the Talarian exiles. Lucas wasn't a soldier. He was a medic. He had been dropped into this hell to pull survivors from the wreckage, to stabilize the wounded long enough to get them off-world. But then he heard it. A distress beacon. Faint, nearly drowned out by the chaos of gunfire and explosions. Someone was still alive. Lucas adjusted the strap of his medkit and pushed forward, weaving through collapsed structures and burning debris. His prosthetic leg, the result of a past mission gone wrong, clanked against the rubble, but he ignored it. His focus was singular. He found her in the wreckage of what had once been a towering monument, now reduced to cracked stone and shattered glass. She lay beneath a massive slab of debris, pinned and unmoving, her form partially concealed by the shadows of the ruins. At first, Lucas thought she was dead, but then her fingers twitched. He didn't hesitate. He knelt beside her, brushing away dust and blood from her face. She was unlike anyone he had ever seen. Her skin had a faint, iridescent glow, shifting subtly between hues of sapphire and silver. Her hair, long and tangled with debris, shimmered under the flickering emergency lights, and her breathing, shallow, but there. "You're going to be okay," Lucas murmured, his voice steady despite the rising tension in his chest. Her eyelids fluttered open, revealing eyes the color of molten gold. She tried to speak, but only a whisper escaped. "You should not be here." Lucas gritted his teeth, setting his med scanner over her injuries. Fractured ribs, internal bleeding, possible spinal damage. "I'm here to get you out," he said firmly. Then the ground shook violently as another explosion rocked the city. A shockwave sent debris tumbling down around them. Lucas threw himself over her, shielding her with his own body as dust and fire rained from above. They were running out of time. Lucas scanned the debris pinning her leg, too heavy to move alone. He pulled out a plasma cutter, igniting the blade with a hiss. "This is gonna hurt," he warned. She didn't flinch. With practiced precision, Lucas sliced through the wreckage, freeing her leg. Blood smeared across the stone, but she barely made a sound. She was strong, but her body was failing. Lucas slung her arm over his shoulder, forcing her to stand. She gasped in pain, but moved. "Come on, stay with me," Lucas urged. She clung to him, her golden eyes flickering with a strange mix of exhaustion and determination. Then, the enemy found them. The first plasma bolt sizzled past Lucas's head, slamming into the rubble beside them. "Shit," he muttered. They weren't alone anymore. Talarian exile soldiers, 3 of them, emerged from the smoke, weapons drawn. Their armor bore the insignia of the exiled royal guard, and their expressions were grim as they focused on the woman Lucas was holding. One of them, a scarred warrior with deep violet skin, spoke first. "You should not have interfered, human." Lucas tightened his grip on the woman. His instincts told him one thing: they weren't here to rescue her. "Stay behind me," he whispered to her, adjusting his stance despite the weight pressing against his shoulder. The woman let out a weak chuckle. Brave, but foolish. The exiles raised their weapons. Lucas didn't hesitate. With one arm supporting her, he pulled his sidearm and fired. The first shot hit dead center, dropping the closest enemy instantly. The second missed by inches as the others dived for cover. Lucas turned, trying to push forward, but he was slower, his prosthetic leg dragging slightly over the uneven terrain. He had fought with it before, but not while carrying another person. One of the exiles fired back. Lucas had half a second to react. His body twisted, shielding the woman as the plasma round tore through his leg. The pain was instant, searing, unbearable. His vision blurred and his prosthetic failed beneath him, sending him crashing to the ground with her still in his grasp. Lucas gasped, the world spinning. His leg was gone. He could hear the enemy moving closer. He wasn't going to make it. But then, she moved. The woman, despite her injuries, lifted her hand. Golden energy surged from her fingertips. The remaining exiles froze in place, their bodies paralyzed by an unseen force. Their weapons trembled in their hands. The leader, the one who had spoken, looked at her in horror. "Your Majesty," he whispered. Lucas's mind reeled. "Your Majesty?" The woman, who had been barely conscious moments ago, stood straighter despite the pain. Her golden eyes burned. "You will not take me," she said, her voice filled with power. "Not today." With a flick of her wrist, the energy surrounding the exiles flared, and then they collapsed, unconscious. Lucas stared at her, still gasping from the pain in his leg. "Your Majesty?" he managed. She turned, kneeling beside him, her expression suddenly softer. "You should not have done that," she whispered. Lucas let out a breathless chuckle, despite the agony. "You're welcome." She placed her hands over his wound, her golden light flickering uncertainly. "I do not have the strength to heal you." "Then get me somewhere safe," Lucas rasped, "and tell me who the hell you really are." Her gaze lingered on him for a long moment. Then she nodded. "I am Syra, exiled queen of the Talarian throne," she admitted. "And because of you, I still live." Lucas gritted his teeth against the pain, managing a weak smirk. "Great, I save a damsel in distress and she turns out to be a queen." Syra tilted her head, amused. "You did not save a damsel," she corrected. "You saved a storm." And with that she lifted him onto her shoulder, turning toward the ruins, where their battle for survival had only just begun. Lucas fought to keep consciousness, but the pain was a living thing, gnawing at his nerves with every breath. His leg, what was left of it, throbbed with the rhythmic pulse of his failing circulatory system. He needed medical attention. Fast. But Syra, the woman, the exiled queen he had just saved, was barely standing herself. She was wounded, exhausted, and relying on sheer force of will to keep them both moving through the rubble-strewn remains of Zolara. Each step she took sent a faint golden shimmer across her body, her bioluminescent markings flickering erratically. It was clear. Whatever power she had used to stop those soldiers had drained her. "Hey," Lucas rasped, tightening his grip around her shoulder. "I know I'm a damn good patient, but you're not in great shape either." Syra let out a dry chuckle. "Neither of us are." They trudged forward, weaving through the ruins of shattered buildings and collapsed structures. Above them, the Union's searchlights scoured the city, their drone sentinels scanning for survivors, or stragglers like them. Lucas bit back a curse. "The Union," he murmured. "If they find us, we're screwed." Syra's golden eyes flickered toward the sky. "The Union does not know I live," she said, "and I would rather they not learn." Lucas huffed out a weak laugh despite himself. "Good. We agree on something." Syra's pace faltered, and Lucas immediately caught her, nearly dragging both of them to the ground. "That's it," he gritted out. "We need to stop. You're going to collapse." Syra shook her head. "If we stop here, we die." Her voice carried no panic, just certainty. Lucas wanted to argue. His medic's instincts screamed at him that they needed to find shelter, stabilize his wound, rest. But the truth was they didn't have that luxury. So instead, he gritted his teeth and kept moving. They didn't have a destination, they didn't have a plan. All they had was each other. After what felt like hours of agonizing movement, Syra finally led them into the dark ruins of an underground tunnel, hidden beneath the skeletal remains of what had once been a great palace. Lucas slumped against a cold stone wall, breathing heavily. Syra, for her part, was deathly still. The glow beneath her skin had dimmed even further, her golden markings barely visible now. Whatever strength she had left, she had spent on getting them here. Lucas reached into his medkit with shaky fingers, pulling out a coagulant injection. He stabbed it into his thigh, what remained of it, gritting his teeth against the fire that spread through his veins as the medication took effect. Syra watched in silence. Lucas let his head fall back against the wall, finally exhaling. "Okay," he muttered. "I think it's time you start explaining." Syra lifted her gaze, her golden eyes unreadable in the dim light. "What do you want to know?" she asked. Lucas snorted. "I don't know. Maybe why a bunch of exiled soldiers were so damn eager to kill you, why they called you your Majesty, why I just lost my damn leg, saving someone who's apparently the most wanted woman on this planet." Syra was quiet for a long time. Then finally she spoke. "I was meant to be queen," she admitted, her voice soft, "but my own people turned against me." Lucas frowned, his exhaustion briefly forgotten. "Why?" Syra let out a breath. "Because I wanted peace." Lucas narrowed his eyes. "That's not usually the kind of thing that gets someone exiled." Syra tilted her head slightly, a ghost of a smile on her lips. "You don't know the Talarian court." She shifted slightly, pressing her hand against the cold stone beside her. Dust shimmered beneath her touch, and for the first time, Lucas noticed the old engravings along the wall. Symbols, words, a forgotten language. "This was my home," Sira murmured. "This palace, these ruins, before it all burned." Lucas stared at her. She wasn't just an exiled queen. She was an exiled queen in her own fallen kingdom. A queen who had nothing left. Lucas let out a slow breath. "Well," he muttered, "that makes two of us." Sira turned to him, her expression unwritable. "You have lost something too." Lucas huffed a bitter laugh, tapping his now missing leg. "Yeah, you could say that." Silence stretched between them. Then slowly, hesitantly, Sira reached out, resting her hand over his remaining knee. Lucas stiffened. He wasn't used to being the one cared for. Sira met his gaze. "Then we're both exiles," she murmured. Lucas didn't look away. And for the first time since he had lost his leg, he realized he wasn't alone in this fight. The underground tunnels smelled of damp stone and forgotten history. Lucas sat against the wall, his wound stabilized, but pain thrumming like an electric current through his nerves. His leg was gone. The weight of that reality pressed down on him, heavier than the ruined city above. But across from him, Sira was still watching. The glow of her skin had dimmed even further, and he could see the exhaustion settling into her bones. She had given everything to keep them alive, and she had lost just as much as he had. Lucas exhaled slowly, rubbing his temples. "All right," he said, voice rough. "So let me get this straight. You were supposed to be queen. Your people turned on you because you wanted peace. And now you're here in the ruins of what used to be your throne." Sira nodded once. "That is correct." Lucas shook his head, huffing out something that wasn't quite laughter. "And here I thought I had a bad week." Sira tilted her head slightly. "Your injury was because of me," she said. "I did not ask you to save me." Lucas met her gaze, his expression unreadable. "I know." A pause. The silence between them felt heavier now, charged with things left unsaid. Finally, Lucas sighed. "So what happens next?" Sira closed her eyes for a moment, her golden lashes fluttering against her pale skin. When she opened them again, there was something steely in her gaze. "I cannot stay here," she said. "The exiles will return, and the Union will not help me. I am still considered a threat." Lucas frowned. "Because of the coup?" "Because I am the last heir to the throne." Her voice was quiet but firm. "And that makes me dangerous." Lucas ran a hand over his face. "All right, so we get you out of here. I know a few people, black market traders, medics who don't ask questions. They can get you off-world." Sira shook her head. "I do not need to run." Lucas raised an eyebrow. "You sure about that? Because the guys trying to kill you earlier seemed pretty committed." Sira's lips curled slightly, a ghost of a smirk. "They are not the only ones who remain loyal to me." Lucas stared at her for a long moment. Then, realization clicked into place. "You're planning to fight back." Sira's golden eyes burned. "I have no choice." Lucas let out a slow exhale. "Damn it," he muttered. "I knew you were trouble." The pain in his leg was unbearable, but Lucas ignored it. He had a bigger problem now. Sira had stood, her back straight despite her exhaustion. Even in the ruins of her fallen kingdom, she still carried herself like a queen. Lucas ran a hand through his hair, wincing at the throbbing in his missing limb. "All right," he said, forcing himself to focus. "You want to fight back? How exactly do you plan to do that when your entire army is either dead or trying to kill you?" Sira glanced toward the tunnel entrance. "Not all of my people have turned against me." Lucas squinted. "You got a secret rebellion hiding somewhere?" A flicker of amusement crossed her face. "Something like that." Lucas exhaled. "I need to know what I'm getting into." Sira hesitated. Then slowly she stepped closer. The glow beneath her skin pulsed faintly like embers in dying light. "You saved my life, Lucas Grayson. I will not ask you to risk it again." Lucas looked up at her, his jaw tightening. She was giving him an out. But the truth was, he didn't want one. He had lost plenty in his life, his home, his leg, his place in the galaxy. But something about Sira, her fire, her stubbornness, the way she refused to give up even when the universe had turned against her, made him want to fight. Lucas wasn't a soldier, he was a medic. But for the first time, he felt like he was part of something worth fighting for. He let out a slow breath. "All right, Your Majesty," he said, smirking despite himself. "Tell me what I need to do." Sira's golden eyes met his, and this time she smiled. Lucas had seen battlefields before, but this was different. He sat on the cold stone of the ruined tunnel, the weight of Syrah's plan settling over him like gravity itself. She wasn't looking for escape. She was looking to reclaim her throne. And the craziest part? Lucas believed she could do it. The way she carried herself, even in exile, even with her body weakened and her people scattered, she still had the presence of a ruler. She was the last heir to the Talarian throne, and if she had her way, she wouldn't be running anymore. Lucas ran a hand over his face. "All right," he said finally. "Let's say I'm stupid enough to help you. What's the plan?" Syrah's golden eyes flickered in the dim light. "I have allies hidden in the outer rim," she said. "Scattered remnants of my royal guard. They do not know I live." Lucas frowned. "So we find them, rally them, and then what? March back to your homeworld and tell the traitors to hand over the crown?" Syrah smirked. "Not quite," Lucas groaned. "You're enjoying this, aren't you?" "A little," she admitted. Lucas shook his head, but he was smiling. Syrah turned serious again, stepping closer. "This is not a battle we can win alone," she said. "But my people, the ones who remain loyal to me, have been waiting for a reason to rise. If they know I live, they will fight." Lucas exhaled. "And how do we get to them?" Syrah glanced down at his missing leg. "You need time to heal, we both do. But we cannot stay here much longer. The exiles will return." Lucas gritted his teeth. "Yeah, I figured as much." He adjusted his position, the phantom pain in his missing limb sending sharp jolts through his body. He had lost soldiers before. He had watched friends bleed out in his arms. But this was personal. Syrah crouched beside him, her golden eyes softer now. "I have seen warriors fall," she said quietly. "I have seen them broken." Lucas scoffed. "Yeah, and," Syrah met his gaze, "and I have seen them rise again." Lucas froze. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The ruined palace around them was silent, save for the distant echoes of falling debris and the hum of approaching Union patrol ships. Then, slowly, Lucas nodded. "All right, Your Majesty," he murmured. "Let's get to work." Lucas had never been a soldier, but he had fought before. He had fought against death itself, against failing bodies, against the inevitability of war. He had stitched wounds together, knowing they might not hold. He had made promises to dying men, knowing he couldn't keep them. And now? Now, he was fighting for something he actually believed in. With Syrah's help, they navigated the underground ruins, searching for a way out of the city. Lucas moved slower than before, his missing leg making every step harder, but he refused to slow them down. Syrah was watching him. She didn't say anything at first, but Lucas could feel her gaze. Finally, he sighed. "Go on. Say it." Syrah raised an eyebrow. "Say what? You're wondering if I can keep up." Syrah's lips curved slightly. "You are stubborn," she admitted. "That is useful." Lucas rolled his eyes. "I'll take that as a compliment." They pressed on, moving deeper into the tunnels. Syrah led the way, her bioluminescent skin casting faint golden light against the walls. Lucas followed, his mind racing. If they made it out, if they found her remaining loyalists, then what? Would they actually stand a chance? Lucas shook the doubts away, one step at a time. Then, a noise. Syrah froze. Lucas immediately reached for his weapon. Footsteps. Close. Too close. Syrah grabbed his arm, pulling him behind a crumbling pillar just as two armored figures entered the tunnel. Lucas cursed under his breath. Union scouts. If they saw Syrah, it was over. Lucas gritted his teeth. His sidearm was drawn, his hands steady, but he knew he couldn't fire, not without giving away their position. Syrah tensed beside him, her fingers glowing faintly with golden energy. Lucas stared. "What are you?" Before he could finish, Syrah stepped out into the open. Lucas's heart nearly stopped. What the hell was she doing? The soldiers barely had time to react before Syrah raised her hand. A shockwave of golden light erupted from her palm, sending the soldiers crashing against the far wall. Lucas barely had time to process it before Syrah turned, grabbed his wrist, and pulled him forward. "Move," she ordered. Lucas moved. They sprinted through the tunnels, the light of Syrah's power still flickering in the air. Lucas's mind was reeling. "You?" he panted. "You can just do that?" Syrah didn't slow, not without consequence. Lucas glanced at her, noting how her breathing had grown shallower. She was strong, but she wasn't invincible. He gritted his teeth. She had just risked herself to protect him. Maybe it was time he returned the favor. They finally reached a rusted metal door at the end of the tunnel. Syrah pressed her hand against it, and the metal groaned, unlocking with a hiss. Lucas exhaled sharply. They stepped outside and into the open night air. For the first time in days, Lucas saw the stars. But they weren't safe yet. Because in the distance, beyond the ruins of the fallen city, ships were waiting. Sierra stiffened. They're here. Lucas followed her gaze. A fleet. Small, but powerful. And from the way Sierra's eyes flickered with something like hope, Lucas knew exactly who they were. Her loyalists. Lucas let out a slow breath. "Guess this means we're really doing this," he muttered. Sierra looked at him. Then, to his complete surprise, she reached out, cupping his face in her hands. "You gave me a second chance," she whispered. "Now I will give you one." Lucas froze, his heart hammered in his chest. Then, slowly, without thinking, he leaned into her touch. And for the first time since losing his leg, since being stranded in this war, he felt whole again. The battle wasn't over. But with Sierra at his side, he knew they would win. The night was thick with tension. The air carried the scent of metal and burning embers, remnants of the war that had ravaged Zolara. But Lucas barely noticed. His focus was on the fleet of ships hovering in the distance, just beyond the ruins of the fallen city. Sierra's loyalists. Lucas turned to her, still feeling the ghost of her touch on his face. "They don't know you're alive," he said quietly. "What happens when they see you?" Sierra's golden eyes flickered. "Either they kneel or they shoot." Lucas let out a sharp exhale. Comforting. She stepped forward, adjusting the royal insignia embedded in her armor, the only thing she had left from her past life. Despite the exhaustion weighing her down, despite the battle wounds that had yet to fully heal, she still looked like a queen. Lucas had seen men with power before. He had treated commanders, warlords, politicians, people who thought they deserved to rule. But Sierra? She didn't just think she was meant to lead. She knew, and something deep in Lucas's gut told him that her people would recognize it too. "Stay behind me," she said. Lucas raised an eyebrow. "Not really my style." Sierra smirked. "I am aware." Then, before he could argue, she stepped forward. The fleet's scanners locked onto them instantly. Lucas braced himself, instinctively tightening his grip on his sidearm. If they opened fire, they'd be vaporized in seconds. But then, a single ship detached from the fleet. It descended swiftly, the engines humming with restrained power before landing in the clearing just ahead of them. The moment the doors hissed open, figures in dark cloaks stepped forward. Lucas tensed. The leader of the group, a tall, broad-shouldered warrior with streaks of silver in his hair, stepped forward, his piercing violet eyes locked on Sierra. For a moment, no one spoke. Then he dropped to one knee. "Your Majesty." Lucas exhaled sharply. One by one, the other warriors knelt before her. Sierra stood tall, her voice unwavering when she finally spoke. "You thought me dead," she said, "but I have returned." The warrior at the front lifted his gaze. "We have waited for you, my queen, but I must ask, why now?" Lucas watched as Sierra's expression hardened. "Because now," she said, "we take back what is ours." The war room inside the flagship was alive with energy. Lucas sat on the edge of the table, the mist listening as Sierra's newly reunited forces laid out the plan for their return to the throne. Talarian's space was heavily fortified, but their advantage was surprise. No one, not the Union, not the traitors who had stolen Sierra's throne, expected her to still be alive. And Lucas? He was part of this now. He didn't know when it had happened, whether it was back in the tunnels or the moment Sierra had saved him, or the second he realized he would follow her anywhere, but there was no turning back. "You're quiet," Sierra said, settling beside him. Lucas smirked. "I'm usually patching up idiots who get themselves shot. Planning a revolution is a little out of my expertise." Sierra tilted her head. "And yet you stayed." Lucas's smirk faltered. "Yeah," he admitted, softer this time. "I did." A long silence stretched between them. Then Sierra reached for his hand. It was warm, solid, real. Lucas felt something in his chest tighten. "I lost everything once," she murmured. "I will not lose it again." Lucas squeezed her hand. "You won't," he said. "Not while I'm here." Her golden eyes burned into his. And for the first time since all of this began, since he had lost his leg, since he had nearly died for a woman he didn't know, Lucas understood something. He hadn't just saved her. She had saved him too. The battle ahead would be bloody. The road forward would be uncertain. But Lucas had already made his choice. He wasn't just a medic anymore. He was her shield. And together, they were about to change the galaxy.